Hi, everyone. It's Vince Molinaro, and welcome to this episode of the Lead the Future podcast. I'm excited to have Neil Hunter as our guest. He is the Chief Learning Officer of Deloitte Canada, and I'm really excited for the discussion because Neil brings over 30 years of experience in the industry through many facets. He's been a former CHRO with deep expertise in leadership and in learning and putting work at the center of end-to-end talent processes across various industries, including energy, public sector, not-for-profit. And today he leads a team focused on enhancing human performance and bringing potential to life so that it improves productivity and the overall workforce experience inside Deloitte Canada and Chile that he oversees. Neil is also the Dean of Deloitte University North, and he sits on the Deloitte Global Learning Executive. He's well-versed in leadership development and succession planning and is sought after for future-proofing people strategies in support of evolving business strategies. And he continues to bring a tremendous amount of expertise in his work from future of work, culture strategy alignment, something that I'm certainly curious about, change management, learning transformation, leadership assessment, and on and on and on. And it's all in service of creating workplaces where people can thrive. So welcome, Neil. Really excited to have you on the Lead the Future podcast, and I appreciate you making time to be with us today.
Thank you, Vince. Absolutely an honor. You and I, there's a great connection there between, I knew it from day one when we met. So I really appreciate being able to chat.
Great. Us too, and me too. So let's start, just kind of tell us a little bit about your role that you have at Deloitte. And then I'm really interested to understand, with the changing business context, how does one think about their role as a Chief Learning Officer?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. My mandate at the firm, that the title is Chief Learning Officer, but just by the nature of the work that we do at Deloitte, in some ways, I'm viewed as a chief product officer, in terms of our product is our people. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but certainly our people in market, continuously trying to improve and bring the best value to clients. That's one of the primary services that we offer. So the mandate is to build better humans and the full spectrum of whole person development, not just better Deloitte practitioners, but actually people who will go on to lead in business, community, and even in government in some cases. So Deloitte sees itself as a feeder for leaders to move into other organizations. And so it's an honor to hold the title of Chief Learning Officer for Deloitte Canada.
That's awesome. So already you piqued my curiosity. How do you think about whole person development, and what does that mean practically, and how you and your team develop learning experiences for Deloitte employees?
Yeah, for a long time, there's a segmentation of work Neil and home Neil, and my interests in music. I love to sketch, all things and talents and skills that I would have to develop on the side. And so we thought, what about, when people come to work, there's so many skills that they have that we don't know about, that developing them would actually make them more interesting people to our clients and actually more interested at work as well. So we started with a pilot on chef school, a very popular exercise that's done. In fact, we had folks submit videos for why they should be, and many of them displaying their personal set of knives and all kinds of very cool things. You got to know people beyond the work side and develop their skills in something that's very passionate and personal, and yet with their work colleagues. And it's very interesting to see just how much it unlocks the growth mindset and the interest in learning, even though it's in something that's maybe not necessarily directly applicable to their job. We see the sort of impact of that in other areas. So, for example, those that went to chef school have almost a 60% higher compliance on their regulatory training. So they're 60% more likely to complete it within the first week that it's available. So that's directly attributable to their interest in learning being piqued outside of sort of Deloitte classes, but something that they are really interested in. So now we're playing with mechanics school, improv classes,
Oh, wow.
things way outside the box. Is there applicability to the work we do? A little bit if you make it personally, but the programs are not designed to make a connection to Deloitte work. It's very much focused on how can you develop yourself and do things that are of interest to you.
That is very interesting. Was not expecting the answer at all, and I've got several questions going on. So, in my own mind, in terms of, in a professional services environment where, where Deloitte, excels, it's ultimately a people business. And I'm curious, what have you been able to see how that novel approach to development translates in either the relationships that Deloitte team members have with each other, but ultimately the impact it has as they're working with your clients across the country?
Yeah, that's one of the primary considerations we have is how does this improve the individual from their own journey, but also is there a spillover effect? And so what's really interesting, Vince, is, if you're an expert in tax law, clients will engage you on tax law. But if you're an interesting person too, you might actually build a relationship beyond tax law. You might both have an interest in rock climbing, for example, and have other reasons to connect. And so relationships, which is at the core of how we do our business, very much how do we help not just other businesses, but our clients as individuals also progress in their career and build relationships that sustain different jobs, different roles. And yes, we can bring our technical expertise, but we can also bring a sense of relationship beyond work. That is what we're all I think craving: connection.
Yeah.
Such an important part of the workplace, both within and outside of the workplace as well, in terms of my relationship with you and the connection that we have. Sure, we have some things technically in common, but we also have similar interests, and so that relationship extends beyond just work.
Yeah. And I would also imagine that, by, Vince were to go to mechanics school and learn that whole, set of that expertise, I got to think that shifts how I think about my own work. I've got now new models to think about tax law, for example, that could actually enable me to provide greater value to the clients we serve. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I can imagine that happens as well.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is relearning how to learn, and we could go on a long time around how damaging I think adult learning principles have been into the field of learning and development over the last few years. But relearning how to play, how to think about learning through the lens of play, and not be so overly structured in that mechanics class gives us the opportunity to learn new skills and play and have some fun. And can we translate that, how we do the design of that program, into, for example, learning about giving difficult feedback and the safe place to practice, all of those types of things that are built into these non-technical specific courses. So you're right. There's a lot to be learned about how to learn through that process that does translate into their interest in other things down the road as well.
Yeah, like we've both been in, this industry a long time, and certainly a core of it is learning and development. I'm curious in terms of how you and your team are thinking about kind of some of the newer influences around AI or neuroscience and whatnot. How are you coming to make sense of those and the impact ultimately they have on development?
Yeah, it's hard not to. AI keeps me awake at night, just in terms of the full breadth and scope of what it is that our people will need to be able to fully leverage it, but also the implication on our work, whether it's just in learning itself, and how we do learning, to be able to create content so much faster, to be able to use new modalities in that learning as well, especially virtually, but even in our in-person, starting to use the power of AI to summarize conversations, etc. It's been very fascinating to experiment. So I think curiosity has been a key skill in our journey through the AI adoption. The neuroscience one excites me even more. I think the more we understand how our brains work, what goes on the supercomputer, what goes on the floppy disk, in other words, what can be retained long term and what's actually just short term, and in how we design learning to factor that in, getting more and more clear about just how much time and space folks have in their brains to retain information, and how to get key concepts in quick, short bursts instead of these 5-hour diatribes that sometimes we have with lectures. So it's starting to really shift the way we do learning. And obviously from an AI perspective, there's been a focus on building those skills now for probably 18 months within our firm to get fluency and then ultimately build some expertise.
That's cool. I want to dig in, since we have you on. You bring this expertise around culture, connection to strategy, and whatnot. And given where the firm is now and its strategy, how have you seen the expectations of leaders shift and evolve in recent years, and what's the impact of that on how you're thinking about their development?
Yeah, more than any time in my work history, there's a real focus on a twofold development of leaders. So we think of leaders of the future often, but there's a very deep focus now on leaders of today, and that they're facing new challenges every day. The agility and the resilience that's required in leadership is something that's extremely significant in developing the leaders that organizations need today. Not so much down the road. We think of those as typical leadership development programs that are developing the leaders of tomorrow, but very much in market and real time sense of trying to make interventions that help leaders be better. So obviously, I've mentioned before, curiosity is key for us, and that growth mindset, because on the foundation of that, leaders are constantly having to learn and stay humble in that process, and realize that they do have to continue to grow. If you're staying, if you get into a space where you feel like, I've been in this for 30 years, I've got it figured out now, you're screwed, pretty much. The world will pass you by really quickly. My team is so sharp.
Yeah.
And every day I'm reminded that I have to stay sharp and growing and learning. So that's new, just the pace at which leaders have to adapt. And then the biggest, shift, I think, is the sense that leaders don't have to have all the answers. For a long time, that is how leadership was thought about by leaders, of being the ones who everyone came to, the sage on a stage kind of construct. But recognizing now, leadership is about curating people who have those skills and knowledge, and bringing them to the table to solve the problems together. And the ability to do that together and connect a community together is where leadership thrives, not so much on having the right answers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll come back to the point of community, because obviously it's a big part of our work as well. So, but I want to get back to this kind of, revisiting what we've held to kind of, be true. What else have you learned now is the best way to accelerate how you unlock the potential of people in leadership roles that may be very different than how you may have thought about it, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Yeah, so the biggest shift, one of the biggest shifts we've seen is, first of all, the how we define leadership, and it's been very cyclical. What makes great leaders? The attributes. If you go to any organization, there's probably, it becomes semantics, but the core things are there. And there's a little bit I think, in the leadership space of back to things like character, integrity, these types of things that are so foundational. And the question of, can we develop that, or is it an expectation when we nominate leaders into roles that they have been demonstrating those things already? I think clarity of expectation has become such an important part of the leadership journey, as early as possible, giving leaders clear expectation. And that expectation comes with accountability, which your writing on leader accountability has been so influential for us. I also think the culture around leadership has shifted, just in terms of who can be a leader, and the need to have diversity of thought on leadership teams, not just the same paths getting there, and that one size does not fit all in development. In fact, personalization has become a very real and present challenge, even beyond persona, but down to individuals who bring, individuals who come into our firm could have been leaders in their previous industry and now are coming in to play a role as partner, that they're not leading any particular discipline. And it's a hard pivot for them to make, to lead through influence, not through title or authority. So these are things that I think leaders struggle with, that are relatively new in the way of work today. And then obviously, be remiss if I didn't talk about hybrid, leading a team from a hybrid construct, which ultimately, that desire to care for your people just changes how you have to engage remotely or virtually. But the need to care, the need to know your people individually so that you can personalize their development remains.
So what have you learned about hybrid? Is there anything that the leaders who have excelled in that transition do differently than others that may still be struggling with that new reality?
I think there's an intentionality in a hybrid environment that isn't necessarily as present, in the collisions that happen in an office context, and in particular around well-being. I think leaders having to be very intentional in asking of how folks are doing, and being genuinely interested, versus the flyby at the water cooler. How are you doing? I'm fine. And you can see and feel body language, and note that maybe not. I think on screen it's much more difficult to just deduce, and so it requires leaders to be genuinely interested and actually dedicate time before, during, or after meetings to ask those questions, and build the trust ahead of time that you catch the new cue. So leaders figuring out what the new cues are, both around wellness, well-being, but also in how folks are doing it in their delivering on their outcomes, etc. It's a nuanced, from the chest up set of body language, and you become much more a student of people on screen versus people in person.
Yeah, that's really helpful insights, and I think that intentionality is absolutely accurate in terms of how we need to think about that. So you referenced sort of the leadership space. I'm curious, as a chief learning officer, as you look out in the leadership development industry, how would you size it up? Because we're nearing the end of 2024.
Yeah, well, a lot of money's been invested in leadership development. There's so many books and research out there, with valued outcomes in each of those. I think our industry, in the leadership space, is constantly, we're looking for the silver bullet, or the chasing shiny objects. And I'm a huge believer that keep it simple and getting back to basics is so important. And it's amazing how basics, even your own work, Vince, on accountability, when you get right back down to basics, it's fascinating how it resonates. But there is still this addiction to finding the shortcut and the shiny object, and is this the magic pill? Um, and I think it's hard in our industry to show direct causation or even correlation sometimes between the leadership interventions that are done and the outcomes.
Yeah.
There's so many different influences on leaders, and so being able to attribute, they're a great leader because they went through this program, is probably not a case you can build.
Yeah.
But as a contributor along the way and part of the scaffolding and the building blocks, for sure. But the building blocks, dissecting those, we're getting better at
Yeah.
understanding. Your leadership journeys actually starts way earlier than when you start taking leadership development.
Yeah.
And being able to get that self-awareness is so key. I think I personally continually say that if I could wave a magic wand for our leaders at Deloitte and give them any gift, it would be self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because on that foundation, leadership development gold that we have in our industry is used appropriately. Without that self-awareness, there's so many great learning experiences, leadership experiences that are provided that people think, I'm good, I don't need that, and
Right.
therefore they're not open to it and don't develop in those areas and have blind spots.
Yeah. And I think tied to self-awareness is that openness to feedback, right?
Totally.
That's pivotal. I think,
The
so
humility.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just the humility to be willing to stay open and learn and continuously get better.
So it's interesting as you were, mentioning the still that propensity to kind of look for the silver bullet, and as you were talking, I think there is a silver bullet, and it's back to the basics, right? It's what you said.
Totally.
It's to simplify, make things really crystal clear and easy for leaders to understand, and then ultimately put into action and incorporate into their day-to-day.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, and we can talk about this probably too, around measurement.
Yeah.
But if I were to ask, how is our industry, how is the leadership industry doing? I would ask the question, how are we doing on followership and trust? Right. How much trust and followership is actually taking place today?
Yeah.
In our businesses? And I would say not nearly enough to achieve the bold strategies that many of our clients and ourselves are looking for. Yeah. That need for leadership, but just by definition, leadership means there is followership, and right. Our skills in followership are not strong across North America. I certainly think in Canada we could do better at how we build followership, and the path to great leadership is through understanding how followership works and the trust that's required.
Yeah, and to build on that is the conversations we're having with other customers, particularly around the idea of community of leaders, is that followership also applies to people in leadership roles, right?
Absolutely.
There are times when Neil is out there leading the charge on a particular initiative, and Vince's job is to support you and to follow you. And there'll be times when that'll flip. And I think that's probably kind of a novel idea for a lot of people in leadership roles who think that there's, you either lead or you follow. And it's not appreciating that you actually do both when you're leading in today's organizations that are highly networked based on, a lot of the work Deloitte's put out on its research on that. And so that I think is also more work for us to do in the future.
Yeah, totally agree. It's not binary. And in fact, knowing the difference, when to lead and when to follow, even your own team, right? Yeah. Sometimes the role the leader needs to play is to get out of the way and let others. I'm finding that in the AI space, right? I am not the smartest on my team by any stretch on AI. And so I watch and follow the direction of my team on how best to use AI and when the right timing and which app is the best, etc. Right? I need to get out of the way and follow.
Yeah. So you mentioned the whole measure piece, and I've certainly found some of our customers, those responsible for learning and leadership development, put a ton of pressure on themselves around, providing the measures, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, that show the efficacy of whatever learning they put into place. And I'd love your perspective on this, because part of what I've been thinking through this, and it ties back to our work on accountability, is really around how much of that ownership is also on the leader themselves, right? Because, like you said earlier, right, companies are investing in leadership development, and generally, like human nature, anytime we invest in something, we expect a payback, we expect a return, and sometimes I'm wondering whether leaders going through the development experience understand their accountability and responsibility to work on driving a return for that investment that the company has put into them. I don't know if you've been doing any thinking on that, but that's kind of top of mind for me right now.
Yeah, I think it's so foundational to even the way programs are designed. So we talk right up front with our leaders about this being a shared mission, and that there's contributions and deposits made by the firm, but it only pays off for that individual and for the firm when the individual takes these things to heart and applies them in their context with their experience, and then it becomes like gold, right? So the differentiation of how folks show up, and the readiness to receive, as I said, the self-awareness, the humility and curiosity, so foundational to successful leadership development in terms of translation of concepts and knowledge to action. And leadership development it's not worth much if it's not turning into new behaviors, new actions, and being able to achieve new heights with your team. And so those individuals taking ownership for that, there's a lot of victim mentality at heart, and during tough times like now, economic pressures, it's easy for leaders to feel there's way too much out of my control here, so I'll just head down and do what I've always done, versus leading through that, creating clarity out of chaos. All of those things that are difficult require courage of the individual, and it's not something that we can train per se. It requires folks to come ready.
Yeah. Cool. So as we're kind of winding down, I'm curious, because you've done this, but oftentimes there's always, in my discussions with heads of learning or leadership development or talent development, this sense of, how do I get a seat at the table? How do I get the C-suites really supporting our work? And so what have you learned about how does a chief learning officer really position themselves strategically with the C-suite?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One is, this seat at the table is an interesting one. I think you set your own table and invite others to that table. When it comes to learning, as a chief learning officer, the expectation is that you are actually setting the table. This is what great looks like, and you're getting input from others, as opposed to begging to be at someone else's table. Create your own. So that's the first thing I would say, and be very intentional about how you look at learning governance. That's a table that you have a key role in setting, and then bring the voices to that table to shape. There's no doubt that you will not get far with a C-suite unless your business acumen is strong. You have to understand the value chain of your business, your industry, in a way that you can contribute to business conversations, not just talent or learning conversations, but in the business space. I think you have to be in a C-suite able to get to the point quickly. Something I've been developing my skills in, not feeling like more is better, but actually distilling really complex things into quick, poignant insight. The C-suite resonate with that. nothing like getting stuff done to earn you the right to do more and get more accountability, leadership with that group. So when given the opportunity to take something on, being the one who puts your hand up and go get it done earns you a lot of stripes. And then the last thing I would say is the skill of storytelling, the ability to tell the stories of what's going on through learning experiences, through leadership, the full spectrum of learning, whether it be experiences, exposure, education components, being able to tell those stories. The C-suite love hearing great stories like anyone else. And so being able to tell one at that level is key as well. Those are things I would develop skills in.
Such a great answer, and I really appreciate that because I know it's going to be so valuable to so many who will either be watching or listening to this podcast episode. So with that, I'd like to bring our discussion to a close. We could have easily gone on for a couple of hours. We just scratched the surface. I think we'll have you back at another time in the future. But I wanted to really thank you, Neil, for making time, sharing your wisdom and your perspectives on learning, leadership, and how we do this in a more compelling way, given the realities that leaders face today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vince. And one thing I didn't mention is just the power of gratitude. So I would love to end with just thanking you and tremendously grateful for the research and the writing that you've put out there, and you and your team continuing to up our game. So very grateful for interactions like this and all that you're doing in the market to help us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. That's very nice of you. Thanks.